Welcome to our Sustainable Future Dialogue podcast at the Faculty of Economy, University of Tirana, powered by the One Future Project. Today we are thrilled to have among us Professor Marcus Abrahamsson from the Lund University, Sweden. Together we will explore the topic on disaster risk management and how climate change is interlinked with this topic. So I am Fatma Yalpi here at the Faculty of Economy, University of Tirana, Department of Management. Thank you, Professor, for joining us today, and welcome to Tirana. We are so glad to have you here.
Thank you very much, Professor, and I'm equally happy to be here. I've fully enjoyed my first visit to Tirana and to Albania this week, where I have had the privilege of interacting with students at the Polytechnic University of Tirana, Luarasi University, and the University of Tirana, where we are now. Should I say a little bit about perhaps myself and my background as well?
Yeah, I would be happy to know about it.
Thank you. So I'm in my regular job, everyday job, I'm an associate professor at the Division of Risk Management and Societal Safety at Lund University, where I'm heavily involved in teaching. I do research, of course, related mainly to preparedness activities in disaster risk management. I'm a program director for 2 Master of Science programs, also heavily involved in an international disaster risk management and climate change adaptation master that perhaps I'll come back to at the end of this podcast. That would be interesting.
We talked about this predicting human behavior, and we saw that standardization it's not a good thing when you talk about, let's say, categorizing people or everything. However, is it any approach that during your projects that you have been working during these years in different countries and in different cultures, can we categorize these cultures, or does culture differences affect the way people make preparation for disasters?
Okay, thank you. Good question, and I think the short answer is yes, to quite some extent. Okay. Cultural differences do affect the way we prepare, and for instance, once again, if I can relate to my home country, Sweden, in general, I would say that the public in Sweden has a fair amount of trust in the formal actors and the government to come and assist if something bad happens, right? So we have a high level of a trust in the ability of the government to act, which of course is a good thing. But it also has a downside, I would say, in that we as individuals, households and communities are not necessarily that well prepared ourselves, because we think that somebody will come and assist us. However, I think that is purposefully addressed now by the authorities in Sweden, where through information campaigns, we are becoming aware that we have a role as individuals, as households, for instance. But okay, so that's one type of context, high level of trust. I've also worked in other contexts where perhaps the belief that the state or the governmental agencies will in fact have the capacity to come help you if something bad happens is not as high. And in such contexts, for instance, it's much more common to see well-developed community-based approaches, like really bottom-up individuals, households, thinking for themselves what they need to do in different types of emergencies, just because they can't really rely on external help or help from the state. So that, I think, is one quite significant difference in context, just the level of trust in the ability of the formal system. Yeah.
Now that you are, let's say, describing this type of context, and differences in cultures for preparedness. Oh, I'm thinking that, for example, me, myself, so I just have a flashlight and then, so in type of emergency and nothing else. But then how do you Swedish people do so? Or how do you, as a person that prepare for risk, do so? Do you have a kit or are you well prepared for
Thank you. Yes, in fact, me and my family, I would argue, is pretty well prepared. Perhaps this has something to do with that. This is my this is my thing. This is my profession. So I should live as I teach, right? But the thing is, for me and for us, it was really an effect of this deliberate push from the government authorities to with the information campaigns that were really informative, information campaigns targeting every household in Sweden, really informative in terms of what can we as households, as individuals do to become more prepared, and what should we do? Because going forward, there may be instances where we can't rely on help entirely from the outside. So, and if you ask me if we have a kit, the answer is yes.
Okay.
We do have food that is suitable for storing for longer periods of times, and we try to rotate that. For instance, a battery-driven radio. We have flashlights, of course, candles. We recently installed this little cassette in our fireplace that keeps the warmth better. So it's an alternative way of heating our house if the district heating system should fail. Having said that, that's not the case for all Swedish households yet. We're getting there slowly but surely.
So this is a call for our Albanian team, so to prepare our kits, so step by step.
Yep.
Yeah. And then now let's go to the questions that I think that you'd love to have on your simulation exercises. Yeah, the one of the main purposes that you came and visited our faculty. So the importance of simulation exercises, for sure, that you'll share with us. But my question is, so I don't doubt on this, but my question is, are these simulation exercises flawless? Are these, so is it something that may not work? So does they make mistakes or so on? So
Yeah, good question, thank you. And I think in order to be able to say something about the success of an exercise and whether it was a productive thing to do, we have to relate it to the objective of that particular exercise, because you can use exercises for many different purposes, some perhaps being of a more strategic nature. You may want to be able to test elements of your plan or the way that organizations are working together and so forth, like organizational structures. Or you can use exercises purely to train your staff in doing some operations that they need to do in an emergency. So the question of success and efficiency really is highly connected to the purpose or the objective. I think what goes into all types of exercises and makes it a successful effort is that you will have to be willing to invest quite a bit in the planning. For instance, if you're an external like myself coming into some context where I'm not the expert, like I mentioned earlier that last year we did a series of exercises for the World Health Organizations on rapid response mobile labs. I don't know anything about that. So you would have to be able to do the research and obviously also involve people in the construction of the exercise that actually knows something about the system that you're about to exercise with, right? So a lot of that goes into planning, and obviously you run the exercise. But if there is one thing that I think is the most common mistake or flow, if you may, in exercises is that organizations sometimes fail to dedicate enough time and resources and energy to really draw the learnings from the exercise and to make those learnings into substantive change. For instance, if you wanted to test the plan, or if you wanted to see if the organizational structure is right for a certain type of hazard, and the exercise sort of brings up some gaps, and we should do things differently. You really have to have processes in place to capture those learnings and to sort of make sure that they lead into the change that you're after, like doing proper after simulation reports and leading it into making sure that responsibility to drive the change with timelines and so forth is really part of the project. And sometimes, I would say too often, it doesn't happen. We spend a lot of time planning, and we do an exercise which is really fun and good, but then not always do we capture or really utilize to the full extent the learnings from the exercises. So there we can improve.
I fully agree. So at the end, what's the purpose of a good planning? So, and we find some mistakes or things to change. So if we don't adopt them, or if we don't revise them, so yeah.
True.
And then for these exercises and for these scenarios, and let's say, do you think that AI, virtual reality, big data have much to say? So in these new perspectives of innovations?
Related to simulation exercises in particular? Yes, I think we already see, for instance, virtual reality and augmented reality becoming part of the way simulations are being run, as a way of enhancing the realism of the scenario and the exercise as such, in a much cheaper and simpler way than doing a full-scale field exercise with resources deployed in the field. Those types of really large-scale exercises obviously sometimes happen, but they are costly. They are usually sometimes disruptive to normal operations, because you need people to be away from their regular work for extended periods of time and so forth. And it takes a lot of planning. So to be able to use new technologies to achieve at least part of that realism, I think is a way forward. And then when it comes to using AI and big data protocols, for instance, in the scoping phase of a simulation exercise project, where I, as an external lead, need to know more about the context that we're designing an exercise for. I'm sure automated processes for finding that type of information could be helpful. Having said that, I'm not an AI person, so I'm just assuming that there's somebody out there who could help me design something like that.
Yeah. Okay, but for sure. So, given all the, let's say, background that you gave, so we are going there. And then in one of your studies and papers, so going through your publications, you discuss on the existence of parallel governmental structures for disaster risk reduction in Southern Africa. So are these structures something that interrupt or cause more harm rather than support the disaster risk management? Or and then do we find them in developing, underdeveloping, or what type of economies do we find such approaches?
Yeah, thank you. What we wrote about there was parallel structures being set up for disaster risk reduction on the one hand and climate change adaptation on the other hand. So you had these two fields, emerging fields, perhaps, that when you look at what these two fields want to achieve, it's very, very similar things, right? So you could argue that climate change adaptation, or at least to adapting to the negative impacts of climate change, uh, very much is similar to disaster risk reduction, right? So if you set up parallel systems in a country to do that, and that was the case in most of the countries that we studied in Southern Africa at that point in time, I would argue that it leads to waste of resources because you have two organizational structures working virtually on the same thing. So, and in a resource scarce environment, that's just not an efficient way to work. And you also asked whether that phenomenon is visible in also perhaps highly industrialized countries. And we haven't made studies on that, but my just impression from looking is that yes, it exists also in industrialized countries. So it is a problem that there. I think when we try to look at the root causes, why it's like that, because we have also looked into that a little bit. It's at least partly due to funding streams being different for these two. Quite often from like international community funding streams. So we need to start there, I guess, to streamline a little bit better between disaster risk reduction and climate change adaptation. Already there.
So, and keeping from this, what you already mentioned, and risk management strategies, do you believe that these one are the most urgent right now? So the ones with related to climate change, or
Yeah. I mean, there are many different processes of change happening in the world that we need to address when it comes to disaster risk reduction. But certainly, climate change is one of the top priorities, right? And I think there it all boils down, I guess, to some view of global solidarity. Because if you look at the way that climate change has been aggravated, it's to a large extent the industrialized world that has sort of driven the levels of CO2 in the atmosphere and so forth, because of extensive use of fossil fuels, of course. And but it seems like even though everyone is impacted, we have had large-scale flood situations in Central Europe lately and so forth, and we see forest fires increasing in intensity. But the really the most part of the effects of climate change have been felt by perhaps developing parts of the world, just due to geographical locations and phenomena. So it's really about, once again, this global solidarity that that the richer nations in the world need to support the countries in the world that has been most affected. And even though such initiatives certainly are taking place, I'm not saying it's not, but I don't think it's enough. And I also see a quite scary trend, I think, in many countries where governments start to become increasingly concerned with national priorities, perhaps cutting budgets for aid and development like that. So I'm not necessarily seeing that we're moving in the right direction there.
It's something that we have seen around a lot. And then let's come back to Sweden and and a case study in your research. So Sweden is a case study in your research, how those Sweden's approach to disaster risk communication on disaster management compared to other countries. So is it something specific? So are you calm? Do you plan? Do you get panicked, or just it's everything in place step by step? No. We have planned everything. So.
I definitely would not argue that everything is in place and we have planned. But in terms of the way authorities communicate with the general public when it comes to risks and also in crisis situation. I think there are a couple of traits that I find positive, and that is that as a general rule, try to be very open and transparent about potential risks or the thing that is actually happening, not trying to sort of hide any information for different reasons, like if you don't want to cause a panic or anything like that. So with a very deliberate move to be transparent. But what I also really like about these recent information campaigns and communication campaigns is that they are really aiming to capacitate us, the people, by really letting us know, okay, but what can we and what should we do to become better prepared? To not just say that you have to do something, but actually provide us with the information. And I'm sure, quite honestly, I haven't done studies like that in other countries, and I assume similar thinking exists in other places, but there might also be places where you're not really that deliberate in the effort of helping the people to become more prepared. So that's one aspect that I guess I like.
And then we started by human behavior, and we saw cultural differences, and we saw Southern African experience, and then Sweden, and then a lot. And then there are some studies on standardization at the same time. So, and then this standardization concept is somehow debated in risk management. Do you have a personal approach on this, or let's say think of this, or saying this?
Whether standardization is a good thing in preparedness.
Okay.
Is that okay? Yes, I'm going to give you, unfortunately, a typical boring academic answer that it depends.
Okay.
I would say yes, there are positive things, but for instance, if we look at the within the EU, we have the civil protection mechanism, which is the mechanism by which countries that have been affected by some natural disaster, for instance, can request assistance from the neighboring countries in the EU, which is a fairly sophisticated pre-planned system. So we already beforehand know what types of resources exist in different countries and so forth. But there, if you're gonna set up a system like that, standardization is necessary. For instance, to make sure that the equipment that another country would bring in, or the way of working, sort of is aligned with what is needed in the country that has a need. And going back to that storm that I mentioned earlier in the podcast, 20 years ago, the mechanism was there. It was not as developed as it is today, but there back then we had instances of portable generators being brought into Sweden from other EU countries to help with getting the electrical grid up again, but they were not compatible. Just the connections weren't there. So in that sense, standardization is important. Having said that, I think that an overly standardized process for approaching preparedness may be a bit inhibiting. Like in the creative phases of preparedness planning, where you need to think about, okay, what could possibly go wrong here? What are the needs that would arise given a certain... There, I don't think we should standardize too much. There we need tools for creativity in that phase. So that's different. So thereby the answer yes and no.
So we didn't escape from this boring academic yes or no, but at least we got a very clear explanation on this.
Thank you.
And then let's come to students, where we are here today at the Faculty of Economy. Do you have any advice? A lot of students, maybe we have a master degree in risk management, and then a lot of students might have this ambition to continue this career path. Or the others that do not have this specialization, they want to jump in this. Do you have any advice for them? So how they can build a career, what they can do, or how to prepare for this? Whatever you feel.
Good, thank you. It's a big topic.
Yeah, it is.
How much time do we have? No, just
so
kidding.
You just grabbed one.
Yeah. No, I guess the first and foremost, you have to have a passion for the subject somehow. Otherwise, it won't make sense. But the thing is, the beauty of disaster risk management, I think, is that it's a truly interdisciplinary field. You need competences ranging from social sciences to understand people's needs and behavior. You need competences from engineering to be able to perhaps design resilient structures and so forth. You need competences within economics because everything is connected to economics, right? And psychologists, and you need so many different perspectives on this. So I would argue that regardless of which background you have academically, there's a way in to disaster risk management and climate change adaptation. One way, for instance, if I can once again exemplify with the master program we have back in Lund, it's an international disaster risk management and climate change adaptation master, where we quite deliberately try to recruit students with varying academic backgrounds.
Yeah.
So we have students from all these fields: medicine, social sciences, economics, engineering, natural sciences, and so forth. Because all of those perspectives are needed, and what we see in class is that the discussions about core issues relating to disaster risk management becomes very vibrant and interesting if you get a room of full of people with different perspectives on things. So and then when it comes to actually getting into the field and working in this field, as I would assume with all professions, that first sort of foot in the door is always the trickiest one, right? To land that first position, contact with some organization or some company that works within the field. In the master program that I mentioned, we have tried to address this by utilizing connections with or various types of organizations active in the field, and we have set up a course for internships. So virtually all of our students go on internships during the master studies to get familiarized with the field and get the first foot in the door. And quite often that sort of leads to students doing their master thesis work in collaboration perhaps with an organization. And before you know it, you might have your first sort of position with them later on. So let your passion drive you where you want to go. That's I guess the overarching. I think it's possible for anybody who's interested to
follow this path career. So I think we are close to an end. Yeah. Thank you so much, Professor Abrahamsson, for sharing with us your expertise and your thoughts. To our listeners, thank you so much for joining us today. And then I was thinking to finish earlier with be sure to join us for next episodes, because a little risk is part of the journey, but with the right CMEX, so simulation exercise, it's always manageable. Do you like it?
I like it. I like it. Thank you very much.
Until next time, have a good day. Have a green day.
Have a green day. Thank you very much, Professor.